When was the last time you just stared at the ocean? You ever watch the waves? Some are small and harmless, others massive, even dangerous. But the interesting thing is that waves don't stay the same. Even those roaring giants, at one point, used to be gentle ripples. How we view a wave really depends on what point in time we meet it. And we often don't have the opportunity to know what that wave was like minutes or even seconds before. So should that matter? Should we take the time to appreciate what it used to be? Or just judge it purely by the threat that it poses right now?
Monstrous. Big angry monsters. Big crazy just gonna get you monsters.
A lot of what we know about James Durgan is based on video recordings. Here's James tossing his teddy bear into the air on a Thursday night in San Francisco. He's camping out in front of a closed restaurant and apartment building when two people arrive. There's no audio on the security camera, but you can see them talking. James looks sort of playful as he bounces from side to side. Just before, he appears to lunge for the door and repeatedly try to yank it open. About 2 minutes later, those same people hose James down, soaking him and all his stuff. James is accused of punching the man off camera and also faces hate crime charges based on what he yelled at that Asian family. So how exactly does someone get this way? Homeless, drug addicted, violent. Who was he before? And what happened? All right, we are headed about 3,000 miles across the country to the hometown of James Durgan. To really understand how Durgan got to where he is today, we felt like we needed to learn more about his past. So, we came here, Duxbury, Massachusetts. It's a fairly wealthy suburb just south of Boston, right on Cape Cod.
It's an American dream to grow up here.
Anne Antonellis is a Duxbury native and has been president of the town's business association for about 2 decades.
Living in Duxbury, you somewhat have to be well off because the house prices are very expensive. So that's difficult because a place that we all have grown up and love, sometimes the people can't stay here because of the expensiveness of the town.
Driving through Durgan's hometown, it doesn't take long for you to see a lot of similarities between this place and the Presidio back in San Francisco.
It's a seaside town surrounded by amazing views of dense forests and beautiful beaches.
I could easily have spent my whole life there. I love it. I miss it so much.
We are heading to the house of James Durgan's older brother. We actually spent weeks calling and writing him, but never heard back. So we're going to see if he wants to talk to us. Is EJ Durgan here? Okay, so EJ Durgan, James's brother, wasn't home, but I did talk to EJ's wife. I told her I was a reporter, and as soon as I mentioned that I was doing a story on James Durgan, it seemed like her eyes started watering. She promised me that she would pass along the message to her husband and see if he's willing to talk to us.
The next day, we headed to James's old high school. It wasn't there. Turns out it was torn down and rebuilt a few years ago. But we heard they kept the old yearbooks at the town library.
There he is, James M. Durgan, class of '87. So he would have been about 19 years old here. Okay, so what's interesting is we found old yearbook photos for Durgan's senior and freshman years of high school. But what would have been his junior and sophomore years, we found no mention of him.
That's when he was in some kind of a rehab.
Dr. Jay Cummings is a school superintendent in Southeast Massachusetts.
About 3,300 students, 6 schools.
He's a former principal, teacher, and he was college roommates with James Durgan. Back then, James went by Jimmy.
They knew he had taken time, stopped high school, gone to therapy, and then resumed high school, finished and graduated.
To deal with some kind of addiction.
Correct, yep. And my impression was it was alcohol addiction. I have to say, in all the years that I lived with him and knew him really well, I never saw him even flirt with drinking, drugs. He had closed that door, it was sealed, and he was moving on in a great direction.
So didn't drink, didn't do drugs?
Never.
At all?
Never. And I can remember him saying that if he had a single drink, if he had any kind of drug use, that would almost open a door that would be incredibly powerful and incredibly negative for him and for everybody else. And that always stuck with me.
How would you describe that Jim Durgan?
Probably the most full of life I've ever seen in an individual before or since. He was the best friend I ever had. It was almost like a big brother to me.
The two met as freshmen at St. Anselm College, a small private Catholic school in Manchester, New Hampshire. James majored in literature.
I thought he was going to end up being an actor or a writer. There was nobody, I thought, that would be more successful.
Even as a college student, James was drawn to fame. In fact, he told stories about being friends with band members from Aerosmith.
Back in 1988, that was a pretty big deal. And I always thought he was full of it. Sure enough, one day out of the blue, up to our dorm, pulls up, I think it was a white Lamborghini. And out of it came one of the guitarists from Aerosmith, who promptly went up to our dorm room, had a long conversation, hung out with us and Jim Durgan, and took off. And Jim didn't even say, "I told you so."
Jay tells us he and James stayed close for years, even lived together after college. He says James ultimately moved to California to chase his dreams of being a writer, but wound up here.
This is a former cattle farm, and now it's a school with 50-acre campus. We have about 400 students here. My name is Hovey Clark. I'm an environmental science teacher. I work at Woodside Priory School, and I was able to work with Jim Durgan here back probably about 20 years ago.
He says James Durgan was hired to live in the dorms of the school as part of the faculty. James taught creative writing to high school juniors and seniors. He also had a passion for physical fitness and coached track and cross country.
How would you describe him?
Jim was instantly energetic, fun, bright, intense guy with a real spark of life.
The two became close friends while working here at the boarding school, which sits just outside Palo Alto. But James quit after about 3 years. It's unclear why, and the two lost touch. That is until about 6 years ago, when Hovey saw James camped out on a sidewalk in San Francisco.
I was aware of somebody, sitting against the storefront, and I heard him say, "Hovey," and it was a really jarring, unnerving moment to recognize that this was somebody that I had been close with.
His good friend and former teacher had become one of the city's more than 8,000 homeless. Since then, James has been arrested and released repeatedly for a range of crimes, including burglary, violence, and drug use. At one point, he even escaped from federal custody, walking out of court-mandated rehab, and was on the run for about 3 months. There were also more chance encounters with Hovey.
Last time I saw Jim was probably 3 or 4 years ago, and a naked man in extremely good physical condition ran right in front of my car. And all of a sudden I realized, whoa, that was Jim Durgan.
In those years of teaching alongside him, did you ever think this might be his path?
Not in a million years, no.
So how did a charismatic, athletic, and well-respected English teacher become homeless? You're convinced it all dates back to one particular day. What happened?
So this goes back over 20 years ago. He said he went to a party somewhere, in California, and had been offered crack and took it. From there, it seemed from afar, from 3,000 miles away, like an incredibly fast spiral into where we are now. And once that door opened, he hasn't shut it since.
This was the same best friend who attended his wedding, even held his children. But today, much of their relationship lives in letters. James often writes from jail.
Jay Bird, I realize that we haven't spoken in a while. I'm sure at some point you must wonder, gosh, what must it be like to be in jail? It isn't easy, and I'm totally ready for this to be officially over with.
And Jay has written letters to the court.
Dear Judge Orrick,
on James' behalf.
Jim was definitely one of the funniest, most vibrant, creative, and kind people I have ever been in contact with in my life. He was one of the greatest people I had ever met.
You still feel like he is one of the greatest people you've ever met?
Yeah. And it's almost illogical, but yeah, I stand by that.
The next morning, we got an email from EJ. That's James's brother.
I'm not interested in being a part of your story. Please don't make any contact of any kind to me or my family. Okay, so that's a no. Guess we're going home.
Next time on Saving San Francisco.
I am here to officially declare a state of emergency.
How does a city with a $12 billion budget look this way?
Dealing with each of the people struggling requires a lot of work.
Have we reached a crisis level here in San Francisco?
Without a doubt. What is really scary is that people just don't even know how bad it is. How many people are like James Durgan?
It instantly registered that was him. It was just the look in the eyes.
It's beautiful people that are being wasted, lost, left behind.